Welcome to Michigan Volumes. My name is Karen Hopper Usher. I'm the host of the show, and yes, that's a name change. I just got married. I'm sorry I've been away for a while. I got married, and we moved. Joining us, though, this week in the studio, I'm very excited, is a very special guest. Her name is Kathleen Brockway. She comes to us from the East Coast with a brand new book called Detroit's Deaf Heritage. She's also the author of a book called Baltimore's Deaf Heritage. Kathleen, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here. This has been a long time coming.
Yes, hello. Good morning.
The voice you're hearing is April. April, what's your last name?
Davidson.
She's our deaf translator. And April, did you train here at the college?
Yes. Yep.
Awesome. So we'll closer to the end of the show, we'll talk more about opportunities to learn American Sign Language here at LCC. But let's get back to the book. Kat, you wrote this book on behalf of the Detroit Association of the Deaf. How did that partnership come about?
Well, I wrote my first book, and then I approached other agencies and asked them if they'd be interested in me doing something similar for them. And the Detroit Association of the Deaf contacted me. And Detroit isn't the only area that I talk about. I actually researched the entire state of Michigan. And the Baltimore book is really Baltimore, Maryland, D.C., Virginia. It's mostly Maryland. But the company Arcadia Publishing that I wrote this through or published it through, they weren't used to dealing with the deaf community. The deaf community is very small. So I researched the whole state. I needed to just to write enough for one book.
Okay. Small but lively.
Yes, right.
And your first book, Baltimore's Deaf Heritage, do you live in Baltimore?
No. I live in another town. People always ask me that. Did you grow up in Baltimore? No, I didn't. So really, I'm an outsider. I tend to find some interesting information about communities where the people who grew up there didn't actually know that information. So it's exciting to give them new information and help them learn more about their area.
Okay. And Baltimore and D.C., of course, has Gallaudet University, so kind of a very thriving deaf culture. Was that sort of a natural place for you to start?
Yeah. I really wanted to show that we have a lot of things, not just Gallaudet University. That's not the only deaf school. There's a lot of places that, deaf people own businesses. They do a lot of different things and are involved in a lot. Really deaf people, we're the same as hearing people. So I just wanted to show people that we're normal. That was my goal. That was my goal for this book.
Yeah, when I was reading it, I was sort of kind of waiting for the shoe to drop. What terrible tragedy has happened? What great fight has the deaf community had? And certainly you touched on some of the things, such as like the oral method, but a lot of it was just, here's life. Here's a party that we went to. Here's a wedding. Here's a baby. Here's a dad.
Really, yeah, there wasn't some big tragedy. Well, except for the Michigan School for the Deaf here in Michigan. The land, the property was sold by the state to a developer, and that was kind of a big deal. That was not great for the deaf community. But we managed to get by. I understand their feelings and tried to capture that. There's just some rare emotions attached to that school that I really tried to show in the book. I tried to show a lot of facts about the Shawnee Oral School that's in Grand Rapids. And eventually it changed, and now it's actually an all-signing school. So it doesn't use the full oral method anymore like it used to. And that's really interesting for the community that everyone's now, they encourage and allow signing, and everyone graduates there can sign. I met a lot of people, and I learned a lot about different individuals. Like, for example, There's a man who's owned a business for 55 years. There's actually a name, Scotch and Sirloin. It's a restaurant. Do you know that? Are you familiar?
I've never been, but I read about it in your book.
Yeah, there's several hearing people that grew up in Detroit that didn't know that that was a deaf-owned restaurant. They said, "Oh, really? I know that restaurant." And I told them, "Did you know it was owned by a deaf person?" And they were shocked. They were really surprised. That was some interesting bit of history. And it was interesting for me to see their reaction. And there's also a story in there about a man, Arlen, and it was by the highway there. They sold alcohol for one day right in the front of a billboard right by the highway. It was by like Northland Mall, I think, near Detroit. And they were CODAs, children of deaf adults. And they were just selling alcohol right with the tables, just tables set up. I have a picture in the book that shows it. And it was, it was just kind of fun to see. People were driving and thought, this is really weird. You're selling alcohol in front of a billboard. And a deaf person did that.
That's awesome.
That's really great. Yeah.
It's like a really, really hardcore lemonade stand.
Yeah, exactly. Like that. And then the same, Arlen, the same man was, he was kind of a loner in high school. So, what are you going to do? He was surrounded by all hearing people. He didn't know who to take to the prom. So he brought a bunch of his deaf friends that didn't go to the high school, but he invited them to go to his prom with him. And just a group of deaf friends all went and just acted like they were part of the high school, but they weren't. And I have a picture of that in the book as well. Mm-hmm. The first chapter of both books is really important. The reason I added Benjamin Beaver in that first chapter was because he was the first deaf person to get a driver's license in the state of Michigan, and possibly in the whole nation. I can't prove that, but he was definitely the first to get a driver's license in the state of Michigan, and he drove on a motorcycle, and in the rain, and said, "I want a license." And the police looked at him at the motorcycle and said, "Can you drive it?" And he said, "Of course I can, yeah." And they said, "Okay, fine." And they gave him a license. But unfortunately, a few years later, they were fighting for deaf rights. Mm-hmm. And many people assume that deaf people can't drive. And actually, deaf people have better eyes than hearing people. We're able to catch a lot of things. We have really sharp vision. And so when things happen on the road, we notice it quickly. But there was, fights for several years all over the United States for those sorts of rights. And there was, the organization refused to provide drivers insurance as well. So there was this group from Michigan that founded the National Fraternal Society of the Deaf. And it's specifically to offer driver's insurance for deaf people. And before that insurance company started, there was nobody willing to give driver's insurance. So they were really able to help the deaf community. And I did a lot of research about that as well.
That seems... so horrifying to be told that you can't drive when clearly you're capable.
Yeah, yes. And Benjamin Beaver, he was really determined because he actually drove in Illinois without a license, mind you, but he drove for a senator there, a U.S. senator in Illinois, and he drove around for him like as his chauffeur, And I saw a picture. I have a picture of that in there in the book, and all the different kind of really cool cars that he drove. That's in the first chapter. You can check that out. Then he moved here to Michigan and, got his license here. And he didn't stop driving until 95 years old. I don't know if he was too old to be driving or not, or if he was the oldest driver. I think there's people who've driven older than 95. I've heard it.
Yeah. But, I mean, he fought hard for the right to drive, so if I were him, I wouldn't give it up for nothing.
Right. And not only that, but other people fought for him as well, or with him as well. And the Detroit Association of the Deaf is actually having their 100th year celebration this year. That's why they sort of commissioned this book. They're really proud of their 100-year history. Benjamin Beaver and a group of deaf men were the ones that first set up the Rosedale Road Club. And that was the name of the street, Rosedale. That was the name of the street where Benjamin Beaver's his house was located. So they ended up naming the Rosedale Road Club after that road. And then they had an athletic club where the men could play football, a variety of sports. And they decided to change the name after that to the Detroit Association of the Deaf. And it's been that way ever since. And it's a social and athletic club.
Was it primarily for men at first?
Yeah, in the beginning. Now it's changed a lot, and there's many women that have joined.
Did Benjamin also have a twin? Is that what I read?
No, he has a brother.
Okay.
There's Benjamin, and he has hearing children, but his brother has 5 generations of deaf children. I mean, really, still today, the family is on their 5th generation of deaf. So they're all over the nation. And so a lot of people know that name, the Beaver family, the deaf family. They're in California and Maryland and Michigan and other states as well.
So 5 generations. At that point, you would assume that it's like a genetic issue. But you also mentioned in the book that in the older times, it wasn't uncommon for families to have multiple deaf children because of childhood illness.
Right. Sometimes it's because of illness. Sometimes it's because of like meningitis or rubella or common illnesses that cause deafness. Or sometimes they're just born deaf and you don't know what caused it. I was born with rubella, so that's why I'm deaf. But I was fortunate to be raised by parents who, when they found out I was deaf, they learned sign language. And so I've used sign language all my life. I'm really fortunate to be a part of a signing community. And so in that book, the best thing I did when writing that book was to interview people and not just research. The people I interviewed were able to give me so much knowledge. I learned so much through them. And they shared stories about their life growing up and the things they learned. And I learned some new things, and they were able to learn some new things about their own community.
For people that aren't familiar with the oral method, can you explain what that means?
Sure. The oral method is essentially talking and lip reading, and really depending on what residual hearing you have. And they don't sign. So either signing is forbidden or it's just not encouraged. So for lead K, it's a proposal to make there to be more options for language development for students that have language deprivation. So now there's talking or signing. It's not so strict one way or the other. We're setting up different groups, and we're visiting other groups that have a similar setup.
Mm-hmm.
I always invite everyone. I think we should all work together. I was taught to lip read myself when I was younger because I was on a swim team.
That would make a difference.
Yeah. Because I had to communicate with my hearing teammates. You know, we'd be in lines all day waiting, and we didn't have paper that we could write back and forth on. So it was easiest for me if I could lip read. And I can speak a little bit. So, you know, did that for about 17 years.
So the swim team would also, I mean, your hands are in the water, right? So you need to be able to, like, look at each other and shout.
Well, no, I'm thinking like when we were in line, like waiting for the event to start, there was a lot of downtime. When it was my turn, I'd go, but when we were in line, we'd wait. It was quite a wait because you'd go one person at a time or one group at a time. So we would just be there waiting, and it was much, you know, how am I going to communicate with hearing people? It's very boring just to stand in line.
I agree. So it was a social reason.
Yeah, right, exactly. I was, really motivated, and I really wanted to learn. I didn't want to just sit and be alone. That's boring. I'd rather be in line and be able to communicate. I was always very motivated to do things, to learn new things, to do research like this, like I'm doing for the books. I love doing research. I love reading and developing a better understanding of people and groups and different states.
So how did you get approached for the first book, The Baltimore History? And she's lifting it and patting it.
Well, that's part of why I'm going to Barnes & Noble later to talk about this, is because this first book, you can kind of see on the back, Arcadia Publishing, they have a group of publications, a group of authors and local publications. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I talked to my daughter about it. And I said, they don't mention any deaf buildings or history. They don't talk about deaf schools. There's important deaf people that own businesses. And in Baltimore community, they're really missing a lot of important people that are involved. So my daughter said, well, why don't you write it, Mom? And I thought, well, okay. So I wrote a proposal. And I was accepted the first time. I was really surprised. They told me to give them, they gave me a 4-month deadline.
Oh my gosh.
I was a bit nervous about that. I had to collect a lot of pictures and data. And then it hit me, and I realized that the deaf community is small. So 4 months was just not possible. I made it. But the second book, I extended that a little bit and had a year deadline. Because in a year, I could do so much more research. I could get so much more in depth and collect more pictures and stories and personal accounts, facts. And I could read a lot more data and information about the deaf community.
What's next? Do you have another one planned?
Well, there's a line now, so I'm looking. I'm looking at a third state. There's some in contention. I went to the National Association of the Deaf, NAD. They had a conference recently, a few weeks ago, that I went to. It was in Arizona. They have like a biannual conference there, and people asked me then, said, I want you to do this state, come to here. And there was so many people that were really excited about it. And I said, well, okay, that sounds good, but you have to talk with an organization and have them contact me, and maybe we can set up a partnership. And then, it's going to be kind of a first come, first served scenario. So they'll have to approach me. But I think I'm looking at West Coast.
You skip through the middle. You did the East Coast, you come to the Midwest, go to the West Coast.
I'm really trying to encourage more deaf people to do this kind of book and to do the research. I can't do all 50 states myself. I would be dead before I got enough time for that. So, it takes really up to about 2 years to finish each book for each state. So I'm just encouraging more deaf people to get involved, research your own state, your own history. And there's a few that are starting to contact me and ask me for details on how they can get started. And, I really want to give them support. I want to encourage them. I want more deaf writers out there in the world.
Do you have any other writing projects in mind for yourself?
Yes, I want to do a children's book about a deaf hero. There's another project I'd like to do, the history of protests, like Unity, like it's a deaf grassroots movement. I want to write about the history of that and do some research about that. Really, there's several different projects that I have lined up, but I'm really focusing on this right now. This is my absolute favorite thing to do. I love reading new people and hearing their stories, scanning their pictures, helping them preserve history. Research is my passion. I love it.
Are you a historian by training?
Well, no. I like to call myself a community historian because I'm not like a professional historian. I don't have a professional degree in that respect, but that's actually been leading me to think about going back to grad school. But when would I have time?
No, I'm kidding.
It's just the projects keep lining up. There's so many things I could do. I don't know that I could be able to find the time for grad school amidst it all. I would really like to, though. It's interesting for me.
I think everybody that I know that went to grad school for history just had the best time. They really loved what they do.
Yeah. I'd love to do more research and give more support to other researchers. There's not a lot of deaf historians out there. And especially like outside communities, not like in the academic field, but actual community people. There's not a lot of deaf historians.
So this is sort of reminding me of something you said earlier, which is you said that a child of deaf parents that can hear is called a coda. And I'm wondering if there's any other sort of terms that would be helpful for everybody to know. Give us the inside scoop.
Sure, yeah. There's KODA, that's kids of deaf adults.
Okay.
There's CODA with a C, child of deaf adults. What's there? There's ASL, is the abbreviation for American Sign Language. Wow, let's see. I'm trying to remember all of the acronyms right now.
Or maybe not even acronyms, but just what are the important cultural things to know? I'm sorry, that's an overly broad question, and it's not your responsibility to educate, but I'm just sort of curious.
Yeah, sure. Well, the important things to know, well, I don't want to offend. I'm not here to offend, but the important things for everyone to know, I guess, when they see deaf people is to see us as normal people. We shouldn't be the last people you know about and just from stories. We tend to be like the last people included in stories or in history. For example, if there's a tornado, the tornado sirens go off. How are deaf people supposed to know that there's a tornado warning happening? We're always the last to know. Nobody warns us. Nobody thinks about us. You just run and find cover, and we get left behind. So that's one of those issues that needs to be resolved. Captioning. There tends to be, like on live news channels or stations, they don't tend to provide captioning. How am I supposed to know what's happening if I can't read it? And it might be something serious like a shooting. For example, 9/11. We saw on TV the pictures of what was happening, but without the captions, we missed all the important details. But people said, oh, captions aren't important. They don't understand how essential it is. Or here at the radio station, or out in the community, like a local radio station or local community, they don't necessarily have the same technology that you have here. And so I've asked, hey, can you do like a transcription, or can you transcribe in the interview that I'm doing? So deaf people, if they can't hear, they can read it. And the response I usually get is, no, I mean, that's just not an important accommodation. And it makes deaf people feel like they're less than. I want to hear what you're talking about. I want to know what's happening. So we need either transcriptions or captioning. It's really important that we have that access. I went up to McDonald's, excuse me. I went up to the counter at McDonald's and I wrote my order down on a piece of paper, and they said, oh, I didn't know you could read. And I thought, oh my, right?
I just laughed.
I'm a normal person. I went to school just like you. I can write. I wrote a book. I can write books. And I've had quite a few people say to me, oh my gosh, you can write? And I just say, yes, just like you. I'm an author, just like you can be. But hearing people tend to be really surprised by that.
Gosh.
I
can't speak for everybody. I do think that, we're conditioned to feel. Oh, sorry. She's talking. Hold on.
I know. No, I know what you mean. I grew up, I'm used to that sort of experience. It doesn't shock me anymore, but I always stand up and say I'm normal. I'm just like you.
So I've actually worked in a couple of the industries that you mentioned. And I think there is a rule now in place for live television or television broadcasts where you're supposed to caption now. Without giving away too much, because I'm not supposed to talk too much about the actual realities of the station where I worked. But I know that there's a technology issue, it's like a technology issue. And then, for breaking news, you do have the option of calling a service that will transcribe it and put it in the captioning. But you have to give them 15 minutes lead time. And sometimes in breaking news, you don't have 15 minutes lead time. It's I'm so excited for the day that the audio recognition software, voice recognition software is ubiquitous. It's just everywhere. It's easy to use. It's free.
For YouTube, they, I know they have an audio software like that that's pretty easy for transcription, but sometimes the captioning is not correct.
Yeah. I mean, because, as a journalist, I do very often tape record interviews and I try to transcribe them, and it's weirdly cumbersome to pause the audio, go back and say, was this an what word was she saying? You sort of take for granted how much you just sort of glide over conversations and don't know precisely exactly every word that somebody was saying until you actually try to transcribe.
Yeah, also with jobs, with employment, we have a hard time getting jobs. Hearing people tend to think that we don't need to be with interpreters, that we don't need that service. They don't want to hire that service, They don't want to hire an interpreter. I, worked more than 20 years for the government. And they probably, would pick a hearing person because then they don't have to deal with an interpreter. That's frustrating for me sometimes. As deaf people, we need to work. We need better communication access like captioning and transcriptions. And we need better education as well. We want to be normal as much as possible.
It's a fair request.
I really hope that people who hear this radio interview, by the way, can come this Friday. I'm going to be here at Lansing Community College doing a presentation, and they can come meet me. It's going to be in the Health and Human Services Building. HHS is what it's called. It's the room, I think it's 005. Yep, is the room number. So anyone who here is at 6 p.m., I will be there this Friday. And they can come hear my presentation. They can come meet me.
That's Friday the 29th of July, 2016, for anybody listening on the web after after this has been posted. I'm
also going to be in Grand Rapids, Barnes & Noble. I'm going to be doing a book signing there from 2 to 4. It's the Barnes & Noble in the Woodland Mall.
Okay, and then I assume you've got a trip over to Detroit at some point.
Yes. Yes, the Detroit, there's a private location there, but there's going to be like it's a deaf Catholic organization. And right after church, we're going to meet this Sunday. And then one senior citizen center is going to host me as well. That's going to be tomorrow in Redford. I'm going to try to come back in October for the Barnes & Noble book signing again for the hearing community in the Troy area. I'm working on getting that set up. But this was kind of the wrong time because apparently this is Harry Potter weekend.
It is Harry Potter weekend. I'm really, really hoping I can go, but I've got so much homework.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm very fortunate to have the Barnes & Noble in Grand Rapids on this Saturday because there's a silent festival that's happening in Grand Rapids as well. So they had to put me on the schedule. It fit what was happening, and it didn't matter that the Harry Potter event was happening as well. So I was so grateful to them for allowing me to stop in and making that happen.
So speaking of Harry Potter, you did have or refer to like a sort of a funny, sad story in the book about somebody accidentally learning British Sign Language instead of American Sign Language. What are the important distinctions?
Yeah, all countries have their own individual kind of sign language. American Sign Language is different from sign language in other countries like French Sign Language, or Mexican Sign Language, Spanish Sign Language. There's just a plethora of different sign languages depending on the country. And you could have an accent or speak a different language. And, so we do sign differently depending on the country that we're from. We don't just have one universal sign language. There's many.
So much easier.
Right. But what happened in that story about the group or the family that I think they were born deaf and then they found out or they, learned they were deaf and didn't know what to do. There was some in Tennessee, and they went to a sign language class. Mom was really excited and motivated to learn, so she took a class so she could communicate with her children. When she was 5 years old, she went into a Tennessee school for the deaf, and the teacher said, "Oh, welcome. We have a new student." This was her daughter, and she was confused. And then Mom said, they asked Mom, "Where did you learn sign language?" And she said, "Oh, we took classes just down the road there." And the teacher said, "Well, just so you know, you learned British Sign Language, not American Sign Language." So that child grew up learning British Sign Language, and Mom taught her British Sign Language. That child grew up, and she ended up actually having two languages because she picked up ASL as she went, and she can communicate fluently in both. It was really an interesting story how that happened.
I feel like she could have gone to be a tour guide in England or something.
Right. Maybe, go to England and she'd be ready to communicate, no problems.
So, speaking of, I remember as a kid taking, small sign language units, the way they try to enrich you, and then you do it for a week and then you never touch it again. But I remember being really, really bad at it. And I was wondering how long it takes people really to pick it up and become as good as April.
Well, it depends on your motivation. How motivated you really are to learn. To be honest, if a hearing guy meets me and asks me out and asks me to teach him sign language, I would say no. Just let me explain. For me as an individual, it takes a long time. It would take forever to teach him sign language. Now, if he was really motivated, then he could go take classes. And then I would be willing to communicate with him. And I would really enjoy communicating, but not the actual teaching aspect of it. So, for example, I can share one story with you that happened in Oklahoma. There was a woman, a hearing woman, and a deaf woman, and the hearing woman said, I would really like to learn sign language. And the deaf woman said, oh no, I don't have any time to teach you. And so she decided to hire and pay hourly that woman's daughter to teach her sign language. And then what happened is they ended up getting married and, with no communicating with each other. So really, it depends on your motivation.
Wait, did she marry the daughter or did she marry the lady?
The mom married the person that they hired. So mom married the person who wanted to learn sign language, then hired that mom's daughter to teach her sign language. Just to be clear, it's kind of convoluted.
I love it. That's genius. Was she also sort of sliding her some money to talk her up?
Well, I don't know her personal life, but it really, there's various examples. Like here at Lansing Community College, they have sign language classes. And I'm sure April here would know. It depends on the students. Some are very motivated. If they really want to learn and take all of the required courses, they'll be more motivated, or some just want to do it so they can communicate in a more casual environment. So there's two different types of students and how they're motivated. So if someone's worried about just their grades, maybe they'll just take a class, realize it's hard, and give up. But if they want to continue, I think that's wonderful. It's really, we can save trees from having to write back and forth. We can save paper. We don't have to communicate that way. It's so much better if people learn sign language.
True. I'm so bad at languages. I'm sitting here and I'm feeling so inspired and I want to learn, but I'm so lazy.
Well,
her face right now.
My parents are very busy people, and but they found out I was deaf, and they were determined to learn sign language. They persevered so that they could communicate with me, and I had that communication my whole life. And that's where I learned my language, and why I was able to learn so quickly. And why I can write so well. I thank my parents for that. And my brothers can sign as well. I'm grateful for that because they helped me have language. They would sign at the dinner table. They'd interpret in front of the TV because that was before captions showed up. So my family would interpret TV for me. It was really awesome. I'm so happy and grateful that I had that communication so I could stay up on what was happening. So I encourage hearing parents especially to learn sign language so you can communicate with your students and your kids. And because these deaf kids go to school and then they come home in the evening and don't have that communication at the dinner table or over the weekend. Don't leave those kids out. It's important that they have that communication.
Love of a child is a pretty strong motivator.
Right.
Do you have just the one daughter?
I have two. I have two daughters. My oldest is 19, and then my younger one is 15. My 15-year-old wants to go to school for pre-med, and my older one wants to go into Gallaudet University this fall for therapy. She wants to major in as a therapist, and she's a hearing child.
You've reared a couple of strong helpers.
Yeah, they are. And their first language was American Sign Language. They learned that before they could even speak.
And that's baby sign is like a thing. Are parents that teach baby sign, are they actually teaching American Sign Language?
It is, yeah, yep. So my children, did wonderful. They could sign great before they could even speak. Because that was their first language. And Gallaudet only accepts 5% of hearing people into their college. So I'm really happy that my daughter's going to be one of them.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah.
So I know that before I showed up, April and Kathleen had sort of met about an hour beforehand. And so I was just sort of wondering, what sort of things do you guys talk about when you know that you're going to be translating for somebody? What sort of things do you need to clarify between translator and speaker?
Yeah, so I'm sure that April learned something new, didn't you? Yes, absolutely. A lot of new things. Yeah, she was looking through my books and was really surprised by what she saw. And she said, she asked me if I grew up in Detroit. And I said, no. She said, how about Baltimore? And I said, no. And she was surprised. How did I write these books if I didn't grow up in these areas? And I told her that I'm an outsider, and outsiders tend to have an interesting and different perspective and be able to find interesting information that local people sometimes overlook, like little fun things that are shared, new information that inspire people to learn more about their local community.
Kathleen, where do you live?
Maryland.
Oh, okay.
Right now I have homes in Georgia and in Maryland. And I grew up really at different deaf schools because my dad was in the military. He retired from the U.S. Army as a colonel.
Mm. So a lot of moving around.
Yes. And they always put me first. My parents always looked for a deaf school first before they found a house to move into. I was really blessed to have them. They prioritized me over their work and their lives and their interests. That was wonderful for me. And it really, they were always at my swimming meets and would talk to the judges before the meets and explain that they had a deaf daughter, and would, talk about the gun. So the gun would be like out to the side so I could see, and I would know to jump into the water because I couldn't hear the gun go off. So my mom was really focused on making sure that I had those equal opportunities. And I'm so grateful that I had that with my family. Now it's still rare to have that sort of experience. So that's why I encourage hearing parents with deaf children to help them communicate and to learn sign language and help them learn sign language. There's so many things that deaf kids miss out on, just casual talk at the dinner table. And that's one of the biggest complaints I hear from deaf people now, is that they felt left out. And so I'll say sometimes, like when I was talking to April, I'll ask them what did that person say? And they'll say, I'll tell you later. Oh, that's so rude. I don't want to hear I'll tell you later. That leaves me out of the conversation. Tell me now. And then I will feel involved in what's happening in that conversation.
I know. I think of all the times that I tell somebody, I'll tell you later. But it's different. It's different when I say I'll tell you later to a hearing person, because I'll tell you later to a hearing person means I'm going to tell you more than what they said. I'm going to give you my interpretation. This is going to be a long conversation.
Yeah, and for me, telling me I'll tell you later, it means really you're never going to tell me. Later's not going to come.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't want pity. Don't pity me. It's just I am used to that. I'm used to that happening, and I really try to stand up for myself and say, "No, tell me now." Like another example was in the hospital. They're famous for like the nurse or the audiologist saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, your child failed the hearing test." That's not a failure. Let's not label it that way. It's just that they can't hear, and that's okay. But don't give them this shocked reaction. It's this like grieving process of, it's like you're going to go to a funeral. Your child just can't hear. That's it. Don't call it a failure. It's just, you hear, "Oh, I'm sorry." I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry I'm deaf. I just have to deal with it. It's just different. I was born that way. Other people, like who are in a wheelchair, they have to accept who they are. People who are blind have to accept who they are. You don't want to go around saying, "Oh, you're all failures." We're not failures. We're normal people, just like you.
So one of the things that I was sort of struck by in the book was your mention of the deaf schools. And then, of course, while you were talking just now, I'm wondering, how far away are some of these schools, and how far away are these kids traveling every day to go to school?
Well, I believe deaf schools, first of all, are a wonderful place because that's where kids learn social skills that they might not get at home. Because many hearing parents don't really communicate in sign language at home. So those students need to develop those social skills, and a deaf school is a great place for them to do that. I hope that at home they get more of a motivation to sign with their parents, and the parents have that motivation, but really they should have those social skills at both home and school. And so deaf residential schools are a wonderful place. That's where they can go. Because honestly, a lot of hearing parents, like I said, are not motivated to learn sign language. So those kids need to develop their social skills for working later in life, for communication, even for their education later.
Did you ever go to one of the residential schools?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes. More than 5 different residential schools or 5 different state residential schools. Plus, I went to a mainstream school. Altogether, I went to like 13 or 14 different schools growing up.
Wow. You're an expert in deaf education.
Yeah, well, I was, I was kind of part of both worlds then because of the mainstream program and then the deaf education program. And I was fortunate to have wonderful programs and some wonderful classes. I was really lucky to have both of those experiences.
So for the residential programs, do your parents come get you on the weekends and you're still like with the family a lot?
Well, I grew up, like I said, as a swimmer, so I had to be a day student. I had to go back and forth every day. I didn't live in a dorm like a lot of students do. The last high school or the last few years of high school, I really commuted back and forth because I was always on a hearing swim team and I needed to.
I do want to ask April a question real fast. And
Sure.
yeah, just so you studied here at LCC.
Yes.
And what's your advice to people that want to learn American Sign Language here at LCC?
We have an outstanding program here. You can take quite a few classes just to learn the language, but then we also have an ITP, which is an interpreter training program. So you can continue on taking classes, learning how to interpret. And really, we have a big local deaf community and a lot of like student interpreters here. So it's an awesome program. Last I heard, it was like in the top 3 for the U.S. as far as ITPs. So it's good.
Is that what you
should
did?
come. That's what I did. Yep, I graduated here at LCC, and then became an interpreter. Yep.
So how much work do you actually get?
What do you mean, like as an interpreter?
Yeah, I mean, do you feel 40 hours a week doing what you're doing here with Kathleen?
Well, that's also the wonderful thing about this profession is it can be really flexible. So I work sometimes 40 hours a week, but I have 5 children, so I'm busy. But I interpret a lot of post-secondary, other like medical appointments. I mean, anywhere hearing people go, deaf people go. So there's so many jobs that you can work. There's always a need for interpreters.
Who pays
Always.
you?
It depends. Sometimes it's a company, like the doctor's office. If it's post-secondary, then it's like the college. They have a budget. They can pay the interpreter. So it just depends. And there's agencies that you can like contract with.
So as a deaf person, how often do you end up having to spend your own money on an interpreter?
Never.
Okay, good.
Because really, I tend to have the company pay because of the ADA. It's the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. That's the reason, I mean, that guarantees reasonable accommodations, which means that as a company, you need to hire an interpreter. You have to. I mean, you can't talk to me. You can't communicate with me. So you need to hire an interpreter so that we can communicate. So if I need to go to training for something, or just anything I need in life, maybe job communication or education, I need to have an interpreter for that.
I know it's the anniversary of the ADA, and they just did something at the DNC
yesterday.
last night.
Yeah, there was a celebration, of 25 years. And I got actually inducted this year into the Hall of Fame for the National Disability Mentoring Program. So I was inducted into that, into their Hall of Fame in the class of 2016. So, I mean, I'm so inspired. That's such an honor to be recognized in that way. By like I said, the National Disability Mentoring Organization. It's an amazing feeling because I do projects like this, and then not just like this book, but doing this helps me to help other deaf people because I can help these schools learn how to preserve their history. A lot of them don't know how to do that. And you can, there's a lot of stories that can be told using ASL. ASL has very specific stories. And so those kind of things need to be preserved. And so part of my project is helping students become involved, and maybe in the future they can become a writer or a historian, or maybe sign in a video telling a story that'll be preserved for later, and then they'll really be knowledgeable about deaf history. Because I realized that looking back at growing up, I didn't know, I thought I knew a lot about my deaf history, but I think students need to take the opportunity to learn more, as much as they can, about their own history.
I had a question and I lost it.
Did I talk too much? I hope not.
No, you did not. I just don't have an attention span.
Okay, so I want to say, so this year is the 100-year anniversary.
Yes, there we go.
Yes, okay, yeah. So, it's one of the oldest deaf organizations still running today. There's not many out there that are still running and have been for that long. And also the Flint Association of the Deaf, they have their own building, and it's still running. It's still there. There's not a lot of, associations for the deaf that have their own building and has been standing for that long. Since 1969, it's been there. So this year, I feel honored to be a part of their 100-year celebration. It's a big deal.
I remember what my question is, but we are running out of time. Do you do you mentor students one-on-one, or is it more of a group activity?
Well, I just started this sort of mentoring program, and I just started this project last week. So it's a process. I've been trying to assess it as I go, but I'm hoping to have a group that I can teach. But it's possible that it could be a one-on-one situation. this fall. We're still discussing about how that's going to look.
Okay. We have just about 5 minutes left, so I just want to make sure that we know, Kathleen, where can we find you online? Where can people find your books?
Sure. I'm on www.katbrockway.com. And then I'm also on social media, all over, really. I'm on Facebook. You can find me under Kathleen Brockway. And then you can find the book there. And then I'm also on Instagram, on Twitter. And my Twitter handle is VEDITZ, Vedits, Kat, K-A-T. And that's, if you Google Vedits, in the first book from Baltimore, that's where I did a lot of my research about George Vedits. He really encouraged deaf people to fight for their rights. And he was born and raised in Baltimore. So that's kind of why I used his name as part of my username.
Awesome. I like it. And you're here for a few more days, and then you'll be back, I think you said in September?
The 29th. Yeah, on Friday I'm going to be here at LCC.
Okay. And then you're in Grand Rapids the next day?
Yeah, so today I'm here, and then tomorrow I'm going to Redford. And then I'm coming back here to LCC on Friday. And then Saturday I'm going to Grand Rapids. And then Sunday I'm going to Detroit. And then I'm going home.
And you've been driving.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's how it works with book promos. Yeah, I mean, you have to do a lot of traveling. And the hearing writers are even really excited about this book because they have their own book by the same company, and they never even knew some of the history that I've been able to research. So it's interesting to share with them as well. They're really passionate about this as well. They said, I grew up going to that restaurant, that Scotch and Sirloin, and never knew that was a restaurant owned by a deaf family. So that's important history. And I'm able to communicate with them through this book, and it's kind of a real sharing of information.
Awesome. The one thing that I did want to ask that I can't believe I forgot, and we've only got 2 minutes left, but how did you interview people that were so far away? Did you just do email, or you have a phone accommodation, right?
Yeah, it's called a video phone. We have video relay services that are provided to deaf people, and we can talk one-on-one if it's another deaf person, or through a hearing interpreter if we're talking to a hearing person. And you just have to have like high-speed cable internet access to make that work. So I talked on the phone with people, I emailed them, or in person we were able to communicate. Sometimes it'd be an hour or 2 hour meeting, sometimes all day. Once there was a really long line, and so of people I needed to interview, and so we were all day. And then I had one person that actually took all day just to interview because they had so much they wanted to say. It just depends, but I enjoy it. I enjoy the process.
Do you feel like you made friends out of doing this project?
Oh, yes, definitely. I made friends with a lot of deaf authors as well, because we were able to share our information. We had similar thoughts and feedback or terminology that we used. And there was a lot of older deaf authors that were really just amazing mentors for me through this process.
Okay. Well, we're about out of time. I just want to thank Kathleen Brockway for coming on the show. Her book is Detroit's Deaf Heritage. It's in the Images of America series by Arcadia Press. She wrote the book in partnership with the Detroit Association of the Deaf. Her previous book is Images of America, Baltimore's Deaf Heritage. And as she mentioned, you can find her around town over the next few days. We're looking at the very end of July here. I also want to thank April for being the voice today. We could not have done this without you. And we got to thank the guys from LCC, the video department, and I can't remember its formal name right now, but they're providing the video, which we will get up online soon. This has been Michigan Volumes. You can catch us here on Thursday nights at 7 p.m. on LCC Radio 89.7 FM. Or, of course, you can find us online at soundcloud.com/Michigan Volumes. And I'm working on putting together a Michigan Volumes website, and hopefully we can get these transcripts online from this conversation and past conversations, although no promises until after I'm out of grad school. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next week.